time guest, a long-time member, or somewhere in between, welcome. We're just really glad that you're here. If you're watching today's service from one of our social media platforms, I would encourage you to turn over to our website, which is rockyriverchurch.com. And there, click on the blue button that says Watch Church Online, and you'll be able to pick up the service exactly where you left off right here. And to the right of your viewer, you'll be able to see that we have some exciting opportunities for you to engage in today's service. On the red button, you'll be able to download message notes, and that's a great way for you to follow along with this morning's message. It'll have all the scripture passage that Pastor Jimmy is going to be teaching from, as well as some fill-in-the-blank type notes. So I would encourage you to have that out and ready to go. Right below that, you have the blue button where you'll see our connection card. And that's so very important because we truly believe that God has some important next steps that He wants you to take in today's service. So just give us as much or as little information as you're comfortable giving. And if you are a first-time guest, just let us know by clicking that button that says, I'm a first-time guest. And we have a exciting gift for you, which is our book called Unshakable, Standing Strong When Things Go Wrong. And it's an awesome book for when you're going through life's obstacles. And it'll teach you and it'll help you grow your faith to become strong and unshakable. So again, just let us know and we can get that copy to you digitally or through the mail. Next, we have our giving option, which is the green button, and you can click on that and can give on our website safely and securely. You can mail your gift in if you're not ready to do that today. Just let us know and we can get you some offering envelopes, or you can give safely and securely through Cash App, Venmo, or PayPal. Just search for Rocky River Church through those platforms, and you can give safely and securely through there as well. And just a reminder that Rocky River Church is a member attender supported church, so no matter how big or small you think the gift is, it all matters for how we do ministry and share the good news of Jesus Christ. So thank you in advance for your tithes and offerings. And then we have some important next steps that we want you to take by serving and by joining one of our small groups that's kicking off in the fall on September 11th. That is Forge for the men's group and The Well for the women's group. Just got plugged in because God is doing some amazing, exciting things in our church, and we want you to be a part of it. So right now we're going to worship, and then Pastor Jimmy is going to come back with today's message. Again, thank you for tuning in, and God bless you.
All right. Well, once again, hello. Welcome to Rocky River Church. It's great to see you guys. Man, you guys have me concerned. There you go. There you go. It is great to see you guys. If you are a first-time guest with us today, or we just haven't met yet, my name is Jimmy. I'm the lead pastor here, and so glad that you are here today. If you have a Bible with you, open it up or turn it on. Go to the book of Esther, which is in about the first third of your Bible. It's in the Old Testament. And go to Esther chapter 4. And then if you haven't already, find your message notes, get those out, and we're going to get started with today's message. So we are in week number 3 of a teaching series that we started just a couple of weeks ago, called Game On. And the idea behind the series is, well, it's simple. It's not easy. And it's so important. And it's something that we talk about a lot around here. And that is, game on. It's time to finally start making a difference. And as much as I can sound like it, I'm going to be an activist today for the gospel and the cause of the gospel and the cause of the church. Some of you know me well enough to know that, I'm a history guy. I love history. I love politics and government history. But I want to tell you, and I've known this for a long time, this is not a recent thing, but the cure for our country, the cure for what's wrong in the world is not a political party. It's not more programs or better programs. It's a person, and that person is Jesus. And here's the thing. Jesus works through us, through you and me. You may not realize this, and maybe you do know it, but you just haven't wrapped your life around it. I'm hoping that during this series, you will wrap your life around that very fact. In week number 1, we talked about knowing and doing the will of God. Last week, week number 2, we talked about God's call on Isaiah in Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 13. And we talked about making ourselves available to God's will. And we found out through Isaiah that sometimes it means saying yes to God even before we know what God's purpose or God's plan is for our lives. So sometimes it just means saying yes before you even know what the message or the mission is. And what was so powerful about that story, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to go back and read it, but also listen to that message. What's powerful is that after Isaiah had this amazing experience, this encounter, I would call it, with God, there was really no saying no to God. The only response from Isaiah was to say, here I am, send me, use me. Next week, we're going to talk about how God has gifted us. We're going to talk about the gifts of the Spirit. We're going to talk about how God has put us together, as a person and as a church, but how God has shaped us to do ministry in the world. But today, I want to talk about the fact that you and I are here. And I don't just mean here in this room. I mean that we're here in the world, that we're alive at this moment in time. You're not here on earth by accident. It's not a coincidence that you're here. Now, you might say, but Jimmy, wait a minute. My parents really didn't plan to have me. I'm an oops baby. I get it. I'm married to an oops baby. Karen's closest sibling to her, I think, is like, let's see, I have to do the math. I think Karen's youngest sibling was maybe 13 when Karen was born. So she was an oops baby. It's kind of funny to hear her dad talk about it, but she's an oops baby. And so I get that. But I would also say that while there are accidental parents, there are no accidental people. Maybe your parents didn't plan you, but God did. And you're right here, right now, because God has a plan and a purpose for your life. Jimmy, you say this all the time. I'm going to say it until I'm dead and gone. God has a plan and a purpose for your life, and it's a right here, right now plan. What are you going to do with it? You know, the daunting thing about being a preacher is that a lot of times you get up and you're pretty sure, well, you don't really want to put percentages on it. I don't want to put a percentage on it because it might make me sick right here on the stage, but there's a percentage of people, they're just not going to listen. You're not going to listen, and yet God has a plan for your life that you're not living out. But you're also tuning God out. Man, I want to challenge you to lean into Him today. Time is important. And it flies. Have you noticed? I mean, goodness gracious. I think yesterday was the first official day of fall. Is that right? Yeah, because you can just smell pumpkin flavor in the air, can't you? It's just everywhere. And I like that smell, but I'm almost sick of it. And we just started fall. And, so we're in the last week of September, first weekend of fall. Next week we're going to have pumpkins here, which is always a signal to me that it's the beginning of fall. And maybe you've also noticed that as you get older, the seasons seem to go by a lot faster. Man. I wish we could stop time. And guess what? You can't. You know that, so stop trying. You can't even slow it down. The only thing that you and I can do when it comes to time is to make the best of it. You know, one of the things that keeps us from making the most out of today is to think about the days that we've wasted. You just have to flush that. You have to bury that. You have to forget about wasting yesterday. The question is, what are you going to do with today? We can make the most of our time and the opportunities that God has given us today. And that's what we're going to talk about today from Esther 4. And what I hope that you'll realize and really just try to wrap your mind and your life around this is that God has put you here right now at this very time in history. And I'm going to challenge you as best I know how to make the most of every opportunity during your days here on earth. Sound good? All right, so before we actually start unpacking Esther chapter 4, let me give you a little bit of the background on the life of Esther and the book of Esther, because it makes all the difference in the world. The story of Esther is just an amazing story, not because Esther was such a great person, but because God used her life. She made herself available to God, and she served God in her time. And so through her, literally, listen, God saved the entire Jewish race and really the destiny of history. And you might think, well, Jimmy, that's just preacher speak. It's not. It's not an exaggeration. If you don't believe me, you should spend a little bit of time this afternoon reading 10 short chapters of the book of Esther. And of course, the chapters in the book of Esther, it's not like 50 pages like some chapters in a book. It's just very short, but it's an amazing, amazing story. See, 2,500 years ago, the Persians ruled the world. Say Persians. The Persian Empire, which is modern-day Iran, stretched from India to Africa. It was a huge place. The mighty King Xerxes was the emperor of Persia. Say Xerxes. Now, he was a powerful king, but he was also a notorious party animal. In fact, when the book of Esther opens up, Xerxes is throwing a party for the rich and powerful noblemen in Persia because he's wanting to go to war. And to go to war, he needs their power, their many, M-I-N-I, many armies, and he needed their money, frankly. So he needed their support. The party he is throwing lasted for 6 months. Think about that. Now, I was a teenager in the 1980s, and I went to some epic parties in the 1980s. My sister's watching. She threw about 3 of the epic parties that I went to, but none of them lasted for 6 months. I mean, 6 months, that's a long time. Well, I guess they didn't last that long. It was the 80s, so I don't really remember that much. But anyway, during this party, Xerxes got drunk. And he sent for his wife, Queen Vashti. Say Queen Vashti. Here's orders for her, contrary to popular belief for those of you who watched VeggieTales when you were a kid growing up. According to VeggieTales, Xerxes banished Vashti because she refused to make him a sandwich. But that's how you teach kids Bible stories. But his real orders were for her to come into the party wearing nothing but her crown. She was an exotic woman, and he wanted to show off his beautiful trophy wife to the other popular, powerful men who were there. And she refused. And you might say, well, good for you, girl. You should have. And I agree. I can't disagree. But her refusing the king like this, it brought some huge consequences for her life. I mean, it might not sound like a big deal. In fact, some of this sounds pretty good, but he divorced her. But in the divorcing, he banished her from his presence, which took away any security she might have. And he took away her queenship. She paid a heavy price for it. So what this does is it makes for a vacancy in the royal family. The king needs a new queen. So this search is made throughout the Persian Empire to find a new wife for the king. The historian Josephus, you should know something about him. He tells us that as many as 400 women were rounded up by force and brought to Susa, which was the capital city. These women, all of them young virgins, were no more than 18 years of age, some of them as young as 13, maybe even younger than that, actually. For a full year, they were prepared with Persian beauty treatments for a one-night sexual encounter with the king, where their hope was to please him enough that he would choose one of them. Well, from this group of women, Xerxes picked a young Jewish woman named Esther. She became his wife and his queen. Just a little more about Esther. She was an orphan girl. She was raised by her older cousin, Mordecai, and he loved and cared for her like she was his own daughter. After she became queen, Esther and Mordecai uncovered a plot by a very evil man named Haman. Say Haman. Dirty dog. Say dirty dog, Haman. Dirty dog. Well, he was a government official, and he was given this godlike status by King Xerxes. In fact, King Xerxes commanded that whenever someone went into Haman's presence, or Haman went into someone else's presence, maybe he walks in the room, the people were supposed to bow to him. He was evil. He was an anti-Semite, which means he hated Jews. And he didn't just hate them. He wanted to kill them, all of them. And so his plot was to destroy the Jews, men, women, and children, all of them on a single day. To do this, he sort of tricked King Xerxes into approving this diabolical plan to kill the Jews, and it became law. And they began to post this law throughout the kingdom. Now keep this in mind. It's an important detail, and we're going to get on with it. The king, Xerxes, he did not know Esther was a Jew. So we're going to pick up in Esther chapter 4, verse 1. And as we go through this passage, I'm going to give you 4 insights that will help you understand that it's time to get in the game. Listen, look at me. It's time to get in the game. It's time to stop wasting time. It's time to be a part of what God is doing in the world around us. Amen? Verse 1. When Mordecai, remember he's cousin Mordecai, when he learned about all that had been done, he learned about this law that it's been posted throughout the kingdom, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city crying with a loud, bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning, grave clothes. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. Here's insight number 1. In our time, at this time, God's people are to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. As God's people, we're to stand firm against all strategies of the devil right here, right now. So think about Mordecai. He had already told the officers that were at the king's gate that he was a Jew. So they knew that. And so that explains some of why Mordecai is acting the way he is. But now, by putting on burlap and ashes, he's showing grief and mourning over this. He's saying basically to all of the people around him, I oppose the king's murderous laws. That's enough to get your head cut off right then, right there. But he stood up. He spoke out, as dangerous as it was, but he spoke out against Haman's evil plan, which was a strategy of the devil. Now, listen, he didn't have to. In fact, to be honest with you, it might not have even been in his best interest to. He could have just tried to play it safe. I mean, after all, his niece is the queen now, and he raised her like a father, so maybe they can just kind of, slip it under the cracks, just lay low. He's not laying low. He's out front. He could have tried to save his own life, but he didn't. He stood up and he spoke out. And listen to me. Listen. You and I have to do the same. Whenever evil is leveraged against other people, we have to stand up and speak out. We have to stand up for other people who cannot stand up for themselves. We have to be a voice for people who don't have a voice. We have to stand up for what is right and stand up for what is biblical, even though it might not be popular or politically correct. By the way, as God's people, we're not called to be politically correct. And by the way, that meant one thing in the 80s, something else in the 90s, something else in the 2010s, and it means something else today. Politically correct just keeps moving on us. But as God's people, we're not called to be politically correct. We're called to be biblically correct. I love what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. It's a challenge. It's a call to arms. And understand how I'm saying that. We don't declare war on spiritually lost people. You understand that, right? I'm not trying to raise up an army of people here so that we can go and start fighting against the government. Let me tell you the best way to start fighting against anything is start praying for it. There are times, you're going to see this just a little later if I remember to point it out. There are times when God's people had no voice. The only thing they could do was pray. They had no lobbyists working for them in the capital city. The only thing they could do is pray. And by praying and putting their trust in God, they changed the Roman Empire. Paul says a final word. Be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. You know why he says that? He says that because Ephesus was a bad place to live. It was an evil place. He said, put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies. And you and I need to remember that. Listen to me. I'm going to say it again. People who are spiritually lost, that's not our enemy. Our enemy is Satan. It's against the evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world. Against mighty powers in this dark world and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. That means in the air. As followers of Jesus Christ, we're to stand against all strategies of the devil. Stand up and speak out. Not through a protest. Protests and boycotts, they don't do anything. Praying does. Speaking up. Being a godly person, bringing godliness into a situation, man, that's what's needed. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're going, oh. I thought we were going to talk about getting up a militia here. No. I'm sorry, my Adderall kicked in about 8 minutes ago. Verse 4, when Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed because she knew what this meant. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was in mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Want to know what that means? That means that Haman was planning on doing what Hitler did centuries later. He wanted to make an industry out of killing the Jews. And not just Jews, but gypsies and undesirable people. If you ever go to Europe, you ever go to Poland, you ever go to Germany, don't you leave without going to one of the concentration camps. Oh, but Jimmy, I just can't handle that kind of thing. You should go there. You should see it. I've been to several of these, and in 2019, at the end of the year, I was in Poland and went to Auschwitz. We could take pictures practically any place there that we wanted to, except for about 4 places. And one of these places was actually a room about the size of this auditorium, and the walls were about as tall as the back wall. So we came in from back there, and it was sort of dark, and you could see a glass cover here, and it was very dark behind it. So we got up next to it, and I realized that's human hair. And so our tour guide came in and told us that Hitler had created an industry out of killing Jewish people. They didn't want to waste anything. The bones that didn't burn up in the ovens, those were ground up and used in fertilizer. The hair, they would send that to textile mills so it could be woven into fabrics and different things for making rugs. They say that even now someone will bring in a rug. They've heard about these textiles, and it was a rug that was passed along a few generations, and they discovered that it has human hair in it. They would take from these people everything that they had. They would take their shoes, they would take their shaving kits, and they would sell those in secondhand stores all over Europe. They didn't just kill them, they made a cottage industry out of killing people. It was nothing new, it was happening here. Verse 8, Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa. They called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and to plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. This guy, he's back and forth. Then Esther told Hathach to go and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people and all the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. Here's insight number 2. Remember that God uses ordinary people to do important things. Remember that God uses ordinary people to do important things. So let's talk about Hathach. Say that with me. Hathach. By most people's standards, he was an insignificant person in history. He was not a noble. He's not a government official. He wasn't a businessman. He was not on the A list for parties in Persia. He wasn't even on the C list. He's not on a list. He's just an ordinary person. In fact, because he was a eunuch, he was less than ordinary because he was castrated and therefore not considered to be a whole man. He was a slave, property of the king. But listen to me. God used him as a lifeline of communication between Mordecai and Esther. His part in the story is to be the courier, but it is critical to what happens here. Are you following me on this? Look in your notes at 1 Corinthians chapter 1. It says verses 26, 27. Paul says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes or powerful or wealthy when God called you. He's saying you're just ordinary people. Instead, God chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. These believers here, these are some of the people that God used to shake up the Roman Empire, not just in Corinth, but all over Asia Minor. And then the gospel spread throughout the Roman Empire. I can't say or overemphasize this enough. Let me ask you a couple of questions here. Do you know the story of where Jesus takes a bag of lunch from a little boy one day in Galilee, by the Sea of Galilee, blesses it, and feeds 5,000 men plus women and children? You know that story? Do you remember that little boy's name? Nobody does. We don't know his name. His name's never given. Now think back to the book of Acts, Acts chapter 9. Paul, for preaching the gospel, not because he robbed a liquor store, not because he shot and killed someone, but because he's preaching the good news about Jesus Christ, he is being threatened by a mob that wants to kill him. He was rescued by a group of men that put him in a basket and lowered him over the Damascus wall to keep him from being arrested and then killed. Do you know their names? Nobody does. Their names are never given. And yet here we are, thousands of years later, reading about the parts they played in history and in the Bible. I think that's amazing. It made me this week it made me think about some people that do things, let's just say in church, they get overlooked, but they do incredible work. And the impact of their lives and the things that they do, they may never know it in their own lifetime. You know, like we have a preschool here. It's called The Bridge. And so my office is in an interesting place. It's the biggest one. I'm glad of that. I need the space. But it's also right next to the River Kids area. And about 11 o'clock, something like that, Monday through Friday, that's where the kids go in from the preschool and they learn their Bible lesson and then they sing their songs. And Liz does that, you know, Liz Bagley. She does a lot of the singing with them. And I think she knows my office is right next door. And so she has them extra loud. What she doesn't know is that doesn't bug me. I love that. I love hearing those kids sing about Jesus. Let me tell you something else you might not know. We have a lady in our church, Hannah, who has started a school for children who have learning disabilities, which may be saying a little too much about learning disabilities, but Hannah tries to help me understand that stuff, and I haven't quite figured out the language, but it's kids who have some learning problems. She wanted to start a school, and she asked me if we had some space. Well, all of our space is full for the bridge. And so I said, listen, what if, she told me what she had at another place where she was. And so I said, what if we cut off a corner in here, or whatever you want. I said, if you want the whole worship center to be your classroom, you can do that. But what if you just take a part of this room and cordon it off and make a classroom out of that? And so that's what she's doing. So also, like right behind my office, I get to hear those kids learning as well. And I'm not sure how those teachers, I'm not sure, because I know it's not their pay. I'm not sure what the reward of all of that is for them. But I think that one day, the full extent of their reward will be known in heaven and not just here. That's how important our church is. And we have parents that come from all different kinds of backgrounds that bring their kids up here to learn preschool things, and they also learn about Jesus. And we have these families that have children that have learning disabilities. If you've never had a child that has learning disabilities, can you imagine the fear in that? Future fear, current fear, the frustration that must be involved in that. Not knowing where they're going to go to school, who they're going to be with, and they get to bring their kids and let Hannah teach them right here in this space that you guys provide. Now, in the world's economy, Hannah and Annie and Jen and all these other teachers, they're ordinary. But I think in God's economy, they're extraordinary. But in a sense, they're ordinary people doing important things. Verse 12. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when the other Jews are killed. This is a warning. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Here's insight number 3. Remember that God is sovereign. That means that God is in control. And that God is working things even when you and I don't realize it. Even when we're frustrated. The Bible says in Romans 8:28, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them. Did you know that in the book of Esther, again, a book in the Bible, but God's name is never mentioned in it at all? Did you know that? And yet his fingerprints are all over this story. He's everywhere in these 10 chapters. And what makes this story so important is that in Esther, we learn about the circumstances that were important to the survival of God's people while they were in Persia. And these circumstances were not about chance, they're about God's design. Why is it important? Because in the link of things, if the Jews die in Persia, we have no Messiah in Judea in the Gospel of Matthew. It's a link. It's a connecting story. And in Esther, we learn that God is in control of history. Not King Xerxes, not President Biden, not President Trump. God is in control. God is sovereign. What Mordecai recognized is that Esther being in the palace was not an accident. He didn't say it, but that's what he meant when he asked her the question, who knows if perhaps you have been made queen for just such a time as this? What he's doing is he's calling her to review her life. He's saying, hey, think about the circumstances. There's no way you should be here. You're an orphan girl from the exiled slaves. And you're queen. And now the king wants to kill all your people. There's got to be more to this. Listen, we don't have time today, but sometime today, later today, or sometime this week, you ought to stop and think about your own life. Think about where you are. Think about the circumstances that have brought you up to this point. Here's what I bet. I'll bet that you will discover that God's hand has been a part of what has gotten you here. And while you may feel like you are in the wasteland, it may be that God has brought you to where you are so that He can use you to do a miracle, to be a miracle, to be a world beater, a world changer, right where you are. We have just a few more verses. Let's get to them. Verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. So this worked. She's been thinking about it. Go and gather all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink anything for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go into the king. I will go see the king. And if I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him to. Here's insight number 4. Remember that some things are worth dying for, most are not. Like Monday night after the game, I got surrounded by a group of New Orleans Saints fans. I thought about this message. Some things are worth dying for. Most are not. That wasn't one of those moments. The last 7 words Esther spoke in verse 16 are some of the most powerful words you'll ever find. If I must die, I must die. Esther didn't want to die, but she's willing to. Why? Because saving her people, thus fulfilling God's purpose for her life, that was worth the price of her life. One more time, I want to look back at what Paul says. This is in Philippians 1, verses 20 and 21. And remember that here Paul is again in prison. He's in prison for preaching the gospel. Eventually, the Romans do kill him, but he lives under that threat continually. And he says, "For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past." It's that boldness. It's standing up and speaking up, sharing hope with other people that's gotten him to this place. And he said, "And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ whether I live or die. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better." You know, one of the things I love about Paul is you don't know what to do with him. If you're his enemy, if you're a part of the Roman government, you don't know what to do with him. This is a guy who says, hey, to live is Christ. If I'm alive and I'm out there, I'm going to preach the gospel. Put me in prison, I'm going to lead all the prison guards to Jesus. If you want to kill me, go ahead. That's even better for me because I'll be with Christ. You ever heard the name William Tyndale? You know that name? Some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I just couldn't help but to bring it back up. It's so powerful. Tyndale was a priest. He was an Englishman and a priest in the Catholic Church. He was one of many priests who saw problems with the beliefs, practices, and doctrines of the church. Men like Tyndale, Martin Luther, and John Calvin, they called for reforms in the church. These men are called reformers or protesters. They just wanted the church to change. They were not trying to start something else, but it became the Reformation or the Protestant movement. One of the reforms they called for was that the Bible to be translated in languages of the common people, which is helpful, right? See, the popes and the bishops and the Catholic kings, they had refused to allow this. For example, it was against the law to translate the Bible into German or English, the common languages. It could only be translated in Latin because that's the language of the priest. So the common people couldn't read Latin, and it didn't matter anyway because it was against the law for them to own their own copy of the Bible and to read it for themselves. Why? Because many of the practices in the church, they were not biblical. And if the people read the Bible, they would know this for themselves. Practices like confessing one's sins to a priest, penitence, purgatory, paying indulgences, none of those are in the Bible. And the bishops knew that if the common people were allowed to read the Bible, they would know the truth about such things, and it would undo them. So William asked for permission to translate the Bible into the English language. He was refused. And he had to run for his life. It was a crime to just ask. He spent 6 years in exile, but while he was in exile, he translated the Bible from its original languages, Hebrew and Greek, into English. The pressure was on him during those 6 years, and eventually he was betrayed by a friend and then arrested. He was in prison for about 18 months. Eventually he was put on a trial. He was convicted as a heretic, which was a death sentence. And so soon after the sentence, they strangled him to death and burned his body. So when we pick up a copy of the Bible like this, the publisher here is Tyndale. We might think, oh, that's a nice book. Isn't that really nice? And it's the good book. But the English Bible that we have has flowed down to us on a river of blood, the blood of martyrs. Why? They did it because it was important enough to die for. Listen, your work's important, I get it. Would you die for it? And just what are you willing to die for? What are you willing to live for? That maybe should be the question. What are you willing to live for? Or who are you willing to live for, to the point that if you had to, you'd have your head cut off for it. Because that's what Esther faced. She faced being beheaded. What are you willing to live for? What are you willing to die for? There's a prayer on the back of your notes. I think it's on the screens behind me. What I want to do is just challenge you to pray this prayer for the next 90 days, every day, maybe multiple times in the day, and then just see what God does in your life. Just give Him room. The prayer is, Jesus, I offer my life to you and everything I've been through. Hey, the good stuff and the bad stuff. One of the things that you'll discover, maybe not in 90 days, but you'll discover one day that God uses the tough times as much, if not more, than the good times. But I give you everything I've been through, the good times and the bad times. I give you my life as a living sacrifice. Please use my life to bring glory and honor to your great name. I am yours. Don't waste your life. Stop wasting it. Use it for the glory of God. Make it count. Now is the time. Now is the time. It's your time. Let's pray together. I want everyone, once your head is bowed, your eyes are closed, I want you to mean this prayer in your heart. I want you to listen. I'm going to read it twice. And after I read it the first time, if you can agree with it, then the second time, you just make it your own prayer. Dear God, I want the rest of my life to be the best of my life. I want my life to count. I don't want to live for myself. I want to live for the purpose and plan you've created me for. Can you say that and mean it? Then let me say it and you just mean it. You receive this into your own life. Dear God, I want the rest of my life to be the best of my life. I want my life to count. I don't want to live for myself. I want to live for the purpose and plan you've created me for. And then again, with every head bowed, every eye closed, if you've never opened your life to Jesus Christ, regardless of your religious background, just say this prayer with me. Just say, Jesus Christ, please make yourself real to me right now. I don't understand all of this, but if you're real, I open up my life to you. I want to know you. I want to learn to trust you and love you. I open up my life right now to your plan and your purpose. God, thank you for loving me and saving me. Jesus, it's in your great name that I pray. Amen.